Hello, thank you for joining me at Bert's Books, where this time I'm going to be talking about, I would say, a wants list item. Realistically, it's more like a probably never get list item. Now, I was kind of jogged into this by, I happened to pick up a couple of days ago a copy of Richard Allen's Suede Head, the sequel to the notorious Skinhead novel. Now, there was a number of items in this series, but perhaps the most obscure, certainly the rarest, is a 1975 title, Inept Skins. So I don't have a copy of this item. All I can show is there is a scan of the cover art, which I'll bring up here. Now, it's very rare that copies of this ever come onto the market. Now, the background of this title, as I understand it, is that the controversy of the Skinhead series, it was there right from the start, right from the first title. By about 1974, the level of violence and unpleasantness had provoked a fairly negative public reaction, but the problem also was that the sales of the Skinhead related titles were dwindling along with the cult's profile around that point. Now, Allen had waded in probably the most violent and controversial titles of his series. There was 1974's Dunderheads and early 1975's Knuckle Draggers. So this title, Inept Skins, is said to have been written as a kind of, suppose, a way of Allen kind of clawing Allen and his publishers kind of pulling things back into a slightly more acceptable realm. So Inept Skins, I think the publisher and Allen had a meeting in, I think, early to mid 1975, and agreed a way forward would be to ease back on the headbutts and the shanking people at football matches and so on, and to try and inject an element of, I suppose, a more light-hearted element into the series. So to that end, Allen came up with this title which kind of tried to introduce a level of knockabout humour into the series. So this Inept Skins, it concerned itself with this rather unlikely father and son teaming. So there's this pair. The dad's name, I think, was Roy, and the son's name was, I suppose he's the author's namesake, Richard. And the book concerns them getting themselves into various kind of rather ridiculous situations in which they repeatedly attempt these rather sort of petty low-level scams. You know, it's not some like they're getting into big heists or anything like that. They're not particularly getting into fights or football rivalry or gang rivalry, any of these things. It just seems to concern itself with these really kind of low-level scam things, and it's on the level of dodging a train fare or trying to sort of blag your way into the zoo without paying, or Roy trying to get Richard into the cinema on the pretense that he qualifies for a child's ticket, this sort of thing. And so it's quite a formulaic sort of approach, and sort of at the end of every chapter, Richard, being the blockhead that he is, just as they think they're going to get away with each little scam, he opens his mouth and puts his foot in it and just blows it for them. So each chapter kind of culminates with this rather defeated admission from Richard to his dad that yet again he has misjudged how to conduct himself in this given situation, and that regrettably yet again it hasn't gone to plan. Now, at some point between this going to press and copies actually hitting the shops, well, opinion varies on this. You know, I've been told someone I know who's a bit of an expert in the area of junk shop glam and bother boy rock and the associated things. He informed me that, to the best of his knowledge, that a few copies actually did make it out to the shops, but the general story seems to have been that the New English Library got cold feet about this thing. I think they sort of, close to official publication time, they realised that this really wasn't going to sit well with the traditional audience for these books, and it wasn't comedic enough really to sort of carry the day without the sort of violence and mayhem and headbanging and all the rest of it. So very, very few copies of this, if any, made it out into the wild. And really the only reason it never featured in the there was a schedule of republishing of these titles in the, I think, in the early to mid 90s. I think Skinhead Times, they set up a sort of publishing, a book publishing arm, where a lot of Allen titles were bound up in kind of, trios. I was about to say threesomes, a trio of titles within one edition. Inept Skins never appeared, and it's only the appearance of discussion, the introduction of discussion boards and things coming into popularity from the end of the 90s into the early noughties, that I think it was a former intern of that company, of the New English Library, mentioned this title at some point, and they were able to replicate the scan of the artwork from, I think they might have held back a copy for their own, pinched it from work pretty much. Now once knowledge of this got out, then the rumour mill kind of went into overdrive a little bit. There was this story did the rounds a couple of years later, that somebody thought they'd got wind of the fact that Stuart Home happened to have a copy in his collection, and that the knowledge of this supposedly precipitated this insane bidding war between Jonathan Ross and Danny Baker. Now this story was fairly quickly rubbished and turned out to be just a mischievous fabrication. I don't know why people would feel the need to do that. But so anyway, yes, to this day, all I have is this kind of very sketchy synopsis, which again originates from the postings of this former New English Library internee on a discussion board some 22 years ago or so, and a little bit of extra info gleaned from, people specialising in that sort of bother glam kind of area. But I've never seen a copy. I don't know anyone personally claiming to have a copy. If anyone does, please do get in touch. I would love to know more. I mean, if ideally scan the contents of it. But anyway, sort of in the wake of this, New English Library and Richard Allen, James Moffat, sort of rethought their strategy and instead just plummeted further into the extremes of ultra-violence that the series represented. The title that then followed, Hard did hit the shops in limited quantities, I believe, but a lot of outlets were a bit reluctant to stock it for obvious reasons. Also, the audience for that kind of thing had dwindled so badly by that point. I think we're talking late 75 now, or early 1976. Punk was just around the corner, and it's still some ways from a Skinhead revival. So that particular title, although I believe there are one or two copies out there in circulation, I think they go for quite a lot. Again, if you have a spare, let me know. But was the end of it, and Alan sort of tried his best at winging it, writing about other youth cults, which he didn't do terribly well at, if you've seen my review a couple of years ago concerning his punk rock title. But anyway, it's one of these interesting little cul-de-sacs, publishing youth culture cul-de-sacs. So good luck on finding a copy. Thank you for joining me anyway, and more from me soon.